So the first thing I start with is a 3mm hex, and we're going to remove the trolley handle. So the trolley handle is held on by 3mm screws, so there's 4 of them, 2 on each side. With the screws out of the way, lift the handle up and use it to wiggle the handle off the wheel. Next, the top cover has 8 3mm head screws from the front to the back. Now you'll want to go ahead and slowly lift the top cover. Keep in mind that there is a cable, so we'll reach in here and remove that cable. Now for the front handle, it's held on by the 6 screws, 3 on each side. With the screws out of the way, let's lift it off. Now keep in mind that you do have the logo light, so making sure that you take it out of the front handle, and you can let it dangle or we can remove it. Next, we're going to remove the rear handle. Same thing. It's going to be 3 screws on each side for a total of 6. With those screws out of the way, we can go ahead and remove the rear handle and unplug the taillights. Now the kickstand is held on by 4 screws, 2 on each side, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. With the screws out of the way, we'll go ahead and lift that off the wheel. To remove the battery, before we go ahead and unscrew it, we're going to start by unplugging the terminals. When you're at this step, always make sure that the board is unpowered, and by doing so you can check to see if there's any LED lights on the board that are lit. If there are no lights lit up, it means that the board is fully drained. Now at this point, we can go ahead and either unplug it from the battery adapter cable or directly from the board. The next thing is the communication and charging cables. So you want to press on the flange and lift off, and then with this, hold the yellow part tightly before pulling apart. Once we have all these removed, we can go ahead and lift up the rubber seal, as well as take the cables out from their seating. Now don't forget to unplug this communication cable to the power board, as well as the one on the driver board as well. There you go. Now that you have all these cables removed, we can go ahead and start unscrewing it from the shell of the wheel. So now that we have the battery unplugged, we're going to go ahead and remove this whole battery assembly from the structure of the wheel. It is held on by 4 screws at the top, as well as 8 screws down the middle. Now these 4 screws at the top secure it to the heatsink, and the 8 screws secure it to the suspension shock absorber. Now all 12 of these screws are tightened down to a certain torque specification, and therefore before hitting it with a power tool, you'll want to use an Allen key or T-handle to loosen the screw before using a power tool. Now with all 12 screws loosened, we can go ahead and remove them. These are all 5mm head bolts. With all 12 of those screws now removed, we can go ahead and carefully release the battery from the wheel. Now that we're at this step, in order to remove the suspension shock, we're going to grab our 4mm hex because these are all torqued down again. So what we're going to do is we're going to loosen them and then use the power tool to remove them. With the bracket out of the way, we can go ahead and lift the shock out of the wheel. Now to release the fender support or mudguard support, we're going to remove the 2 screws at the top and the 4 screws here. Now with those 4 3mm screws out of the way, we're going to remove the 2 4mm screws at the top that connect to the mudguard. With that, we can lift it off the mudguard and slide it out towards the top of the wheel. Again, we're going to lift it off the top of the mudguard and slide it towards the top of the wheel. Now we have full access to changing the tire. Now that you're at the tire, what we need to do is to pop the bead. And what it is to pop this outer edge of the tire that is sealed along the edge of this rim. In order to do so, you'll want to put your weight onto both sides of this tire and squeeze down until it pops off. Once you've popped the bead and the air has been released, now with the top bead removed, we're going to go ahead and squeeze the bottom bead off along the whole circular rim. Inside here in the rim there is a groove, and what you want to do is put both of these tire edges into that groove. So we're going to squeeze to make it nice and narrow and then push into the groove. You can see that the tire has now sunken in. With this pushed on one side, on the other side you'll have more play, and at this point you can go ahead and pull the tire off. Now to install the tire, first of all you want to make sure and check if your tire has a certain direction. Now this tire, there's a certain direction and the V faces this way, and we want to make sure it goes with the rotation. So if you check your wheel, you'll see that the charge port is here and the headlight is there, which is the front of the wheel. And so you want to, before you mount the tire, you want to make sure and check to make sure the orientation is correct. So in this scenario, this is the orientation that I want because the tire wants to be in this rotation normally. Now that we're ready to install the tire, what you want to do is squeeze this line into that gap again. So we're going to feed it here, squeeze it into that gap, and then use that to put the tire onto the wheel. Now if you have a tire iron or a lever, you can go ahead and use that because it will make your life easier. However, I'm not using it. So now we have one of the beads set into the tire. We're going to set the second bead now. So again, squeeze it over, and once you have a decent amount, we're going to squeeze it into that gap. So just like that, we've put the tire onto the rim. Now, being a tubeless rim, you'll want to go and try to set this tire as center as you can before you go and pump up the air. And this will allow the bead to set without you needing extra tools. Now that we have the tire back on, you'll want to try and center it as best as you can on the rim. Make sure you look around and make sure you can see this line that goes across. Once that is ready, we can go ahead and attach our pump and pump it up to your preferred PSI. Once you've pumped it up to the proper PSI, you can check this line here along the rim to make sure that the bead is set all the way through. Once that has been confirmed, you can unplug your pump and put the TPMS sensor back on. Make sure you include the TPMS locking nut before you put the TPMS sensor back on. Once that's all the way to the bottom, we'll screw the TPMS until it's tight. Once tightened, we will back the nut back to provide that tension so it doesn't fall off. There you go. Now let's put the suspension shock back in. Now we're going to place back our fender support, slide it down from the top, and then drop it on top of that mudguard. Now you'll see here that you have some holes, threaded holes. You want to grab the 3mm screws to throw into the threaded holes. We're just going to put all 4 in first, and then we'll tighten them down. With all the screws in place, we're going to tighten them down and make sure they're hand tight. With those done, we'll grab the 2 4mm bolts and put them on the top of the fender. Again, with these bolts, we're going to make them hand tight, so once they're snug, a nice 1/4 to 1/2 turn, and you're good to go. With that in place, we're going to put the shock. Make sure that the shock is seated all the way to the bottom. And then we're going to grab our suspension clamp and clamp the shock down. So for these 6 screws, you'll want to go and grab your torque wrench again. We're going to change this value to 7 Newton meters. We're going to try to apply all these screws evenly, and then when we get to the torque wrench, we will torque them down. Now before you grab the torque wrench and tighten things down, we want to take a look at this line here to make sure that this gapping and this gapping are fairly equal. Right here, this line between the 2 pieces. Once you've confirmed that both sides are roughly the same and all the screws are snug, then we'll go ahead and use our torque wrench. So with 7 Newton meters, we're going to go and torque this down. Now to reinstall the battery, we're going to place the battery pack back onto the wheel. Now in order to make sure that the alignment of the battery pack and the suspension unit is good, we're going to start by putting the screws in, which are these long ones, on these 4 holes. This will help us set up the alignment before we tighten everything down. Now we're not going to tighten this all the way, we're just going to make it nice and snug. Once those 4 screws are snug, we're going to go ahead and put these 8 screws back in. Now with these 8 screws, we're going to put them in and have them snug in an alternating pattern. And then we'll tighten them down all at the same time with the torque wrench. Okay, with all those screws in, we're going to grab our torque wrench and torque these down. With our torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters, we're going to go ahead and tighten all these suspension bolts down. With all 8 of those bolts tightened down to 10 Newton meters, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the 4 bolts at the top. Now the 4 bolts at the top, we're going to tighten down to 12 Newton meters. Now with the battery fully connected to the structure, we're going to make sure that this seal is on the outside of all the cables before we start plugging them in. We're going to start with our power board here, followed by our driver board. So we can tuck this cable in and have it become out of the way. And then we're going to go ahead and connect our charging circuit, which is this XT small connector, as well as this clip. And with all that connected, we'll go ahead and connect our driver board. Now again, you don't have to worry about sparks because the driver board at this point is fully discharged and the batteries are turned off, so they're not outputting any power through these XT connectors until you power on the wheel. Now let's go ahead and do some wire management to make sure that nothing gets set up when we put the top cover on. Now what we want to do is go ahead and replace the seal. So making sure that it goes into the groove and is well placed all around before we put our top cover on. With that done, let's go ahead and inspect all of our cables to make sure that nothing is going to get pinched when we put the top cover on, and that everything is in its right place. Now let's go ahead and put the kickstand and handles back on, and then last we'll put the top cover. Now first, before we go ahead and install these handles as kickstands, I'm using a power screwdriver, but this screwdriver specifically is able to doing anywhere from 0.4 to 3.5 Newton meters. Now, with all the accessories that go on the wheel, they don't need that much torque, so I'm going to put this down to around 1 Newton meter. This will give me sufficient torque to make sure it's tight without worrying about over torquing into the magnesium body. Now we can place our kickstand in, make sure it's aligned to the bottom here, and then we'll throw in our top screws to make sure it's held in place properly. But before we go ahead and tighten these screws, we're going to make sure we place all 4 and then tighten them down. Now that all 4 screws are in, let's tighten them down to around 1 Newton meter. Now let's go ahead and get the rear handle on. Now when putting on the rear handle with the taillights, we're going to go ahead and connect them to the wheel, making sure that the clip matches the right direction. And then when installing this handle, you want to make sure that the right side cable goes on top along this path right there, and this bottom on the left cable, we're going to make sure it goes above the charge port and into that groove. So making sure these 2 things will make sure that none of your cables ever get pinched. So right there, just like this. Later on when we put the top cover on, we'll make sure this stays in place. Similar to the kickstand, we're going to put all the screws into place and then tighten them down together. Keep in mind that there's 2 types of screws. The long ones go in the top and the short ones go in the bottom. Now with all those screws in place, we're going to go down and tighten them all. It's about 1 Newton meter. With the front handle, we're going to make sure that we place the logo into the groove, nice and secure, and then we'll go ahead and make sure the cable routing is correct before putting it on the wheel. Making sure that the cables don't get pinched. Now you're going to grab your 4mm. Once they're all in, we can go ahead and tighten them all down. With that complete, let's go ahead and put the top cover on. Now when putting the top cover, you'll want to make sure you plug in the display cable, which is near the Ride Connect module at the back. With that clicked into place, we're going to put down our top cover while making sure that none of the cables are being pinched or have the ability to be pinched. With that in place, we'll put all of the screws lightly in first. Now that all the screws are in place, we're going to go and tighten them down one at a time. Now when you tighten them down, just make sure that the body line sits flush with the body, and this will make sure that you have the best eye aesthetic experience. Now lastly, we have the trolley handle. I'm going to place it in the groove and screw it down. With the 3mm screws, 4 of them. With that all done, you should be good to go and turn on your wheel.